Ladies and gentlemen, in a time where everyone is speaking, online, in rooms, across platforms, it's easy to believe that being loud is the same as being impactful, but tonight I want to invite you to consider a different path. One that isn't about rushing to be seen or scrambling to be heard. One that's rooted in patience, in clarity, and in building something that truly matters. Because when you stop chasing attention and start creating from substance, you don't just earn a voice, you earn the moment when people choose to listen. Silence builds substance in ways that most people overlook. In a world that rewards the loudest voice in the room, silence can feel uncomfortable, even unnatural, but it is often in those quiet, in-between spaces that something powerful is being formed. When someone withdraws or chooses stillness, it's rarely because they have nothing to say. More often, it's because they are beginning to hear themselves more clearly than ever before. There's a certain kind of silence that isn't avoidance, it's intention. It's not the silence of suppression, it's the silence of alignment. During this time, we stop trying to react to everything, to fix everything, to be everywhere. We stop performing and start observing. We start to notice the thoughts we usually drown out with noise, the feelings we normally push past. We become aware of what we've been carrying and how heavy it really is. This kind of silence isn't empty, it's full of self-awareness, full of unasked questions, full of a deeper truth that's been waiting to surface. And that substance, those quiet realizations, those moments of internal shift are what make us more grounded. When we are constantly speaking or reacting, we are outputting energy, but in silence we start to receive. We tune in to what's going on underneath the surface, and we learn that not everything requires our immediate response. Some things simply require our presence. When someone goes silent, they often start to grow in ways others can't see yet. They process things more deeply. They begin separating what's real from what's performance. They stop trying to impress and start trying to understand. It's in this space that they let go of ideas, identities, and habits that no longer serve them. The silence becomes a mirror, showing them not only who they are, but who they are not, and that kind of clarity doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It settles in you like gravity, steady, solid, undeniable. It changes the way you walk into a room. You may not be the loudest, but you carry something different. People feel it, not because you're trying to be impressive, but because you're no longer trying at all. You're just being, and that authenticity is magnetic. Many people avoid silence because they're afraid of what they'll find in it. They don't want to sit with their regrets, their pain, their uncertainty. But those who are willing to stay with themselves in silence, without distraction, without validation, are the ones who emerge with depth. They've looked themselves in the eye, they've wrestled with their own contradictions. And they've chosen growth, even when no one was watching. It's easy to talk. It's easy to fill the space with opinions, noise, and performance, but speaking without substance doesn't build connection. It creates distance. What truly connects us to others is the courage to go deep, even when no one is applauding, and that depth can't be manufactured in the spotlight. It's formed in quiet moments when you choose to sit with the uncomfortable parts of your story and own them. Silence builds substance because it invites us to slow down and ask, what actually matters to me? It forces us to evaluate whether the life we're living is in integrity with what we say we value. That's not always an easy question to answer. But if we keep moving too fast, we never give ourselves the chance to ask it. Eventually, silence becomes the foundation beneath your words. When you speak again, your voice carries more weight, not because it's louder, but because it's more rooted. You're not talking just to fill space. You're speaking because there's something real behind what you're saying. You're not trying to be heard. You're speaking from a place where you already know who you are, whether or not anyone validates it. In this way, silence isn't a pause between the important parts, it is the important part. It's the place where you become someone worth listening to, not because you said something clever, but because who you are has been shaped by your willingness to go deeper than most people are willing to go. And that is what builds substance. Most people spend their lives chasing validation, often without even realizing it. It starts young. When a parent claps for our first step, when a teacher praises us for getting the answer right, when someone notices how we dress or what we say. That approval becomes addictive. We begin to attach our sense of worth to whether someone else nods, claps, agrees, or likes what we do. Over time, we learn to shape ourselves based on what we believe will get a positive response. It becomes less about who we truly are and more about who we think we need to be to earn love, attention, or respect. Validation isn't inherently bad, it's natural to want to feel seen. But when it becomes the driving force behind how we behave, we start losing touch with our own values, preferences, and needs. We edit ourselves, water down our personality, second guess our choices. We abandon our truth for a version of ourselves that feels safer, more palatable, more likable. It's subtle at first, laughing at things we don't actually find funny, saying yes when we mean no, staying quiet when we have something meaningful to say. But over time, these small compromises add up. We wake up one day realizing we're living a life built on approval, not authenticity. The pursuit of validation often leads us to perform. We perform confidence. We perform happiness. We perform connection. And yet underneath that performance is often anxiety, because we know on some level that if people only love the version of us we're presenting, they don't actually love us. They love the role we're playing. That's a lonely place to be. You might be surrounded by people, but still feel like no one really knows you. You might be getting praise, but it doesn't land, because deep down you know it's not praise for the real you. It's for the version you've curated. Authenticity, on the other hand, is risky. It requires vulnerability. It asks you to speak even when your voice shakes, to say no even when you fear disappointing someone, to show up as you are even when you're not at your best. Authenticity means telling the truth, not just to others, but to yourself. It means asking, what do I actually want in this moment, instead of what do they want from me? It's messy, imperfect, and sometimes inconvenient. But it's also real, and in that realness there is deep peace. When you begin to prioritize authenticity over validation, you shift your focus from being liked to being known. That shift is everything. Because being liked is temporary, and it's often based on shallow criteria, being known, truly known, is lasting. It creates relationships built on mutual respect, not performance. It attracts people who resonate with your truth, not your mask. And it gives you the kind of confidence that doesn't rely on applause. Authenticity isn't loud. It's not about being brutally honest or raw for attention. It's quiet, steady, and grounded. It's knowing who you are, even when others don't agree. It's trusting your values enough to let them guide your decisions. It's being willing to walk away from anything that asks you to be less than you are, even if that means being misunderstood. When you live authentically, you may disappoint some people. You may lose certain opportunities, but what you gain is far more valuable, a deep connection with yourself. People often fear that if they stop trying to win approval, they'll end up alone or invisible. But the opposite is usually true. When you show up in your truth, you start attracting people who value that truth. Your relationships become deeper and more meaningful. Your work feels more aligned. Your life starts to reflect who you really are, not just who you were pretending to be, and that's when things begin to click, not because you've finally cracked the code to being likable, but because you stopped needing to. There's a unique power in being able to look in the mirror and say, I like who I am, regardless of who else does. That's freedom, that's stability, and it's something no amount of external validation can give you. Because when the applause fades, when the likes stop rolling in, when the people who once praised you turn their attention elsewhere, you'll still be standing, rooted in your truth, aligned with your values, at peace in your own skin. And that's where real confidence lies, not in being liked by everyone, but in being loved by the few who truly see you, and most importantly, by yourself. Growth doesn't always look the way people imagine it. It's rarely dramatic. It doesn't usually come with a big announcement or a defining cinematic moment. More often, real growth shows up in quiet, private spaces where no one is watching, no one is clapping, and no one is posting about it. It happens in the in-between, in the moments that seem ordinary, in the choices that feel small and insignificant, but those choices, they are everything. It's in the split second where you decide not to send the text you know you'll regret. It's choosing to pause instead of react. It's walking away from a conversation that pulls you back into the version of yourself you've been trying to outgrow. It's saying no, not because you want to hurt someone, but because you're finally learning to protect your peace. That's growth. No one celebrates the moment you decide to get up 10 minutes earlier just so you can sit in stillness before the day begins. No one sees the effort it takes to bite your tongue instead of escalating an argument. No one applauds the day you choose to forgive someone, not because they apologized, but because you refuse to carry the weight any longer. These aren't big, flashy moments. They're quiet acts of transformation. They're what shape your character when no one else is around to notice. It's easy to believe that change only counts when it's obvious, when you quit the job, leave the relationship, move to a new city, start the business. But the truth is, those moments are usually the result of 100 smaller ones that came before. You don't suddenly become strong enough to walk away. You become strong one boundary at a time, one hard truth at a time, one brave choice at a time. It builds quietly until one day something clicks and you make a move that seems bold from the outside but feels natural from within, because you've been preparing for it all along. Growth lives in your inner dialogue. It's in how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. It's in whether you choose to shame yourself or be curious, whether you spiral into self-criticism or choose to reflect with compassion. It's in the way you take responsibility, not to beat yourself up, but to learn. These internal shifts aren't visible to others, but they change everything about how you move through the world. There's a version of you that used to get triggered by certain people or situations. You used to feel the need to defend yourself, to be right, to win, and now maybe you pause, maybe you breathe, maybe you choose peace over proving a point. That's growth. It might not feel exciting, but it's proof that you've evolved. It means the things that used to own you don't anymore. We often overlook our progress because we're conditioned to measure it in dramatic milestones, but the most meaningful kind of growth doesn't make a lot of noise. It's choosing to do the right thing when the wrong thing would be easier. It's staying true to your values even when no one else would know if you didn't. It's choosing to stay in discomfort a little longer instead of running from it like you used to. These are the micro moments that compound over time. They're not just habits. They're the building blocks of who you're becoming. Some days you'll feel stuck. You'll wonder if you're making any progress at all. But look at the patterns you're breaking. Look at the thoughts you're challenging. Look at how much faster you recover. That's not nothing. That's the work. The real work is invisible before it's undeniable. It starts internally and manifests gradually, not in leaps, but in steps, not in highlights, but in quiet victories that no one else sees. You won't always get credit for the ways you're growing. People may not notice that you didn't react the way you once would have, or that you chose to walk away instead of making the same mistake again, but you'll notice, you'll feel the difference, and that's what matters. Because at the end of the day, growth is not about impressing others. It's about becoming someone you respect, someone who chooses with intention, someone who moves through life consciously, even when no one's looking. That's where the real change is happening, in those subtle, everyday choices, the ones that seem too small to matter until one day you look back and realize they mattered more than anything. There's a certain kind of voice that doesn't need to shout to be heard. It doesn't need to dominate the conversation or demand attention. It carries weight simply because it comes from depth. And when someone speaks from that place of lived experience, of honesty, of internal clarity, people feel it, not just with their ears, but with something deeper. There's a resonance, a stillness, a pause that happens in the room. Because what's being shared isn't just information, it's truth, and people can feel the difference. We live in a world full of noise. Opinions are everywhere. Everyone has something to say. Everyone wants to be heard. But not everyone speaks from substance. A lot of what we hear is reaction, repetition, performance. It's designed to get attention, not to create connection. But when someone speaks from depth, there's no performance. There's no striving, there's just presence. There's a calm assurance that comes not from trying to be right, but from knowing who you are. Depth isn't something you can fake, it comes from experience. From the moments that broke you and the ones that built you back, from the hard lessons you didn't want but needed, from the nights you questioned everything and the mornings you chose to keep going. When someone has lived through enough, felt enough, reflected enough, they earn a kind of stillness, and when they speak from that place, even a few words can move you. What makes it powerful isn't how perfect or poetic it sounds. It's how honest it is, because depth isn't about being impressive, it's about being real. When someone shares something vulnerable, something raw, something they've wrestled with instead of something they've rehearsed, you can feel it. There's no need to convince, no pressure to perform, just truth spoken with a kind of grounded clarity that stays with you long after the conversation ends. Speaking from depth doesn't mean having all the answers. In fact, it often means being willing to admit what you don't know. It means sharing from a place of humility, not ego. It's not about dominating the room, it's about creating a space where others feel safe to go deeper too. It invites connection, not competition. It reminds people they're not alone, that someone else has felt what they're feeling and made it through. When you speak from depth, people lean in, not because you're loud, but because they recognize something familiar in what you're saying. They don't just hear your words, they see themselves in your story, and that's what real impact looks like. It's not about being admired from a distance. It's about being understood. It's about making someone feel seen in a way they haven't felt in a long time. There's also a different kind of confidence that comes from speaking this way, not the kind that's flashy or loud, but the kind that's rooted. When you know your story, when you've done the inner work, when you're not afraid to be honest, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need everyone to agree with you. You're not speaking to be approved of. You're speaking because you have something meaningful to say, and that meaning doesn't come from trying to sound deep. It comes from living deeply, from paying attention to your life, from feeling your feelings instead of numbing them, from asking hard questions and being brave enough to sit with the answers. It's the product of introspection, not intention. You don't speak from depth to move people. You speak from depth because you can't not, because it's who you've become. There's something magnetic about people who speak this way, not because they're trying to draw others in, but because they've stopped chasing anything external. Their attention isn't on how they're being perceived, it's on what they're actually offering. And that shift changes everything. You stop performing, you start sharing, you stop trying to impress, you start trying to connect. In a world of quick takes and surface-level conversations, this kind of presence is rare, but it's unforgettable. You may not remember every word someone said, but you'll remember how it made you feel. And the words that come from depth, they stay with you, not because they were loud, but because they were true. There's an urgency many people feel to be seen, to be heard, to be recognized. In a world that rewards speed and visibility, it can feel like falling behind if you're not constantly speaking up, sharing, producing, or promoting yourself. We're told to use our voice before we're taught how to listen to it. And as a result, many rush to be heard before they've built anything worth listening to. But the most impactful voices are rarely the loudest. They are the ones shaped by intention, by clarity, by the willingness to wait until there's something real to say. The need to be heard isn't wrong. It's deeply human. We all want to feel like we matter, like our thoughts and experiences are valid. But when that need drives us to speak prematurely, we often end up echoing others, repeating what's popular, or projecting what we think will get attention. We start chasing approval instead of alignment. We focus more on visibility than on substance, and in doing so, we risk building a platform on a foundation that isn't strong enough to hold the weight of who we truly are. There's a kind of quiet power that comes from taking your time, from resisting the pressure to constantly show up before you're ready, from allowing your thoughts to mature, your ideas to evolve, your perspective to deepen. When you stop rushing to be heard, you create space to actually learn. You begin to understand not just what you think, but why you think it. You begin to ask questions that challenge your assumptions. You let your beliefs be tested, and that process, though often slow, is what gives your voice real depth. Many people speak from reaction. They're responding to what others are saying or doing, trying to insert themselves into conversations before they've figured out their place in them. But speaking from a place of reaction often lacks grounding. It may capture attention for a moment, but it doesn't create lasting resonance. In contrast, when someone speaks from reflection, from having sat with their thoughts long enough to refine them, their words hit differently. There's a quiet conviction in their tone, a steadiness that tells you they're not speaking for applause, they are speaking from truth. This kind of voice is built, not discovered overnight. It's shaped in private moments, in silent seasons, in experiences that don't make it to social media. It's built in the hours spent reading, thinking, listening, failing, healing. It comes from living, not just performing, from asking hard questions and being willing to not have easy answers, from turning inward before turning outward. When you prioritize that kind of foundation, you stop speaking just to be included, and you start speaking because you have something unique and valuable to contribute. There's also a kind of courage in holding back, in knowing you could jump into the spotlight, but choosing instead to keep building, keep refining, keep getting clear. It takes strength to not rush, to let go of the fear that if you don't say something now, you'll be forgotten. But what you're really doing is ensuring that when you do speak, people will want to listen, not because you're louder than everyone else, but because you've earned their trust through your integrity, your consistency, and the depth of what you bring. Sometimes the best thing you can do is go quiet for a while, not because you're silencing yourself, but because you're preparing. You're learning how to make your voice an instrument of clarity rather than noise. You're studying what matters to you, so when the moment comes to speak, you're not just adding to the conversation, you're elevating it, and people can sense that. They may not know what you've been working on in the background, but they'll feel the difference when you finally show up. You won't have to force their attention. It will come naturally because what you're saying carries weight. In a world full of noise, the most powerful voices are those that come from stillness, from patience, from deep inner work. You don't need to rush to be heard. Let your voice be something you build with care, not something you throw together in a hurry. Because when you take the time to cultivate depth, people don't just hear your words, they feel the years behind them. And that's when you're no longer just speaking to be seen, you're speaking to truly connect.